Hello, this is Michael Osborne with Webucator. In this video, I'm going to show you a solution that Dave Clark came up with for dealing with null safety issues when we work with JSON data types in PostgreSQL. Now, Dave agreed to let us create this video showing his solution, which is available as an article on his blog at the URL shown here. Let's begin by identifying the problem that we're dealing with. In my PostgreSQL server, I have created a database called TestDB. And in TestDB, currently there are no tables. So let's go take a look at some code real quick. What we're going to do is we're going to create a table called books. I'm then going to insert into that table 3 rows of test data. Now you'll notice that the table has an author column, and the author is of data type JSON. So these are, in fact, JSON objects. When I insert the values into the table, you will see that there are various forms of JSON objects. The first one has a first name, does not have an address at all. The second row has an address containing a street name. And the third row has an address, but the value in the address is null. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a couple of the PostgreSQL operators. These are so-called field fetch operators. They're specifically for retrieving fields from JSON data. The first operator returns what is known as legal text. We'll use this to retrieve the fields. Now, this operator is pretty good at soaking up nulls, generally speaking. There's also a second operator which returns the data, but in this case, it will always return the data in the form of plain text. So let's go simulate this problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table, again, called books. You'll notice it has an ID of type integer and an author of type JSON. Again, I'm going to insert 4 rows into this table. The first row contains an ID, and the JSON column, the author column, is null. The second row contains an ID, and in the author column, it has first name Michael. The third row has an ID, and in the author column, it has address, street name, and an actual text value street name. The fourth column has an ID, and it has an address, but then it contains null in the address. So we'll go ahead and run this code to create our table, populate it with data. And now I'm going to run some queries against this table. In the first case, I'm going to query for the column with an ID 1. Now you'll notice here that I'm selecting author, address, street name. There is no street name in that row. In fact, there is no value at all in the JSON column. So when I execute this, you'll notice that that operator soaked up the null, dealt with it appropriately, and just gave me essentially an empty result. Now, let's do the same thing with row 2. Again, row 2 has a first name, Michael, in the JSON column, but there is no address. So when I'm selecting the address street name, again, my operator is very effective at dealing with that null. So far, so good. The third row contains an address, a street name, and has an actual value. And when I query the third row, I, in fact, retrieve or return that actual value. The problem comes in with the fourth row. You'll notice in the fourth row, we have defined an address, but the address contains a value null. And when I query that row, I get this error: I cannot extract an element from a scalar. It doesn't know how to deal with that. So how do we get around this problem? Well, the first thing we could possibly do is we could use a case statement in our select. You'll notice in my select statement here, I'm using a coalesce first of all, and I'm checking for where the case is author address is null or author address has a street name. Now, if both of those return null, then I will instead put in the value no street name as author street name, and no matter which way this goes, I should get an actual text string value back from my query. So let's go give that a whirl real quick. When I execute this query, I in fact retrieve from row 4 no street name. So this worked. This was effective. But here's the problem. This is a bit verbose. It's kind of kludgy. And every time you write a query, you're going to have to write this same case coalesce statement. So it's a solution, but probably not the best solution. A much more effective approach would be to build a function to handle this problem for us. So what I've defined here is a function, and let me make a little room here so you can read it better. And in this function called JSON fetch, we pass in an object of type JSON and a variadic nodes of type text, which is an array. We then declare a result variable of type JSON, and we assign the object that was passed in to that result. Then we declare a variable k of type text, and then we loop. And basically what we're doing is we're looping through the nodes array, and we're checking if the result k is null. In other words, look in that object for a field with that name, and if it's null, then return null. Finally, we specify that the result is equal to the result k if it has not returned null. So basically, we're duplicating that process we saw earlier where we were iterating through using the case and the coalesce to try to find the first non-null value. So let's go ahead and create that function and see how it works. So I'm going to run this code real quick, which will create my function. And now we're ready to test it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute the select statement. And in the select, I'm going to select the ID, and then I'm going to say coalesce. And I'm going to call that JSON fetch function. And I'm going to pass in author for the JSON object. Then I'm going to pass in the address and the street name. And finally, the string no address. So what's going to happen here is it's going to search through the fields in that JSON object, and it's going to look for an address and a street name. If it doesn't find either of those, it will then return the string no address. So again, if I execute this for all the rows in my table, you will see that each row has returned a valid result. Now, if there was no address there, it simply said no address. And if there was, it returned the appropriate address. Okay. I'd like to again thank Dave for the inspiration for this video. Be sure and check out his blog at the URL you can see here for some other articles related to PostgreSQL. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it.